Squidge Rugby, you're back.
Again.
We love having you, and you love coming on.
I love to be here.
It's a great combo. Thanks for coming again, mate.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We are going to discuss all things Lions and what we expect from them, how we think they might play under Andy Farrell, and as we look forward to what will be, I think, a dominant Lions victory. If I'm honest, I'm putting myself out.
You put your neck on the line right now.
Again, I'm really confident Lions going to go there and do a hell of a job.
It feels that way. It's almost at a point of, even as a British and Irish fan, wanting Australia to sneak a test just to add to the drama.
Just something. Give us
please,
something,
come on.
Please. No, I do. I think Lions going to go there, and I really do. I think they're going to proper dominate.
They should. Yeah. They should. Like, even Wales, as the weakest of the 4 teams, were very close pushing them there. And you'd imagine if the other 2 had gone over the, or the other 3 rather, had gone over the summer, you would be looking at series wins for any of the individual teams. So it then becomes the weird alchemy magic of putting the Lions together. How much does that change? How much does that affect what these players can do over in Australia?
That is the biggest obstacle, because the player pool that the Lions have, the talent that they can pick from, I think it's up there as strong as it's ever been. So, and then the question is, how does Andy Farrell want to play?
Well, that's for me, that's the interesting thing, especially in attack, because if you look at the way Ireland attack, I think it's been the tight combinations, how short they pass and options out the back and the free-flowing game they play, that's taken a long time to install. And as we've said on this podcast before, the hardest thing to install in a rugby team is the attack. Like, defence you can get sorted and become pretty hard to beat, but actually having an attack that can break teams down is tough, and it takes a long time to install. And so if Andy Farrell wants to have that Irish system of attacking, it's kind of like, does he then pick Irish players that know it, or does he go, actually, I'm not going to have time to install that attack, I'm just going to pick the best players I have, and we'll almost let, like with traditional Lions tours, it's like, we've got great players, just play with the talent, your God-given talent, and make stuff happen. Because you think about the great Lions tries, I think about it, it's like, they're probably not sort of set up phase 1, 2, 3, we're going to attack this person on the short side. It's literally a bit of brilliance, a Driscoll or Robinson or whatever. It's just the magic they have. So when you got George North, yeah. And when you have the best players in the world, or best players in all the hemisphere, pretty much. Okay, the best players in Britain and Ireland. Sorry to Anton DuPont there. Yeah, it's the ability to get the best players the ball and let them play. It's almost like old school rugby in that regard.
Well, that's the interesting thing about the way this being an Andy Farrell team and it being the British and Irish Lions, which is essentially an all-star team. And yet you look at Ireland and Farrell, and the star is always the team themselves. You know, whenever you talk about the headline out of any Ireland game over pretty much this whole era, it's always, you know, what Ireland achieved as a unit. You never have the headline being, you know, so-and-so has a brilliant game. And even the likes of Caelan Doris, who's been one of the best players in the world this year, it's never the headline that Caelan Doris dismantles South Africa or whatever. The one exception being a drop goal in the last play from Frawley. But you kind of feel like they've never been that kind of team. You know, he creates very cohesive, well, I suppose it's the only time he's been a head coach with Ireland, but he's created an incredibly cohesive team that feels like a unit rather than a set of all-stars. So it does kind of feel, despite him clearly being the best candidate for the job as an outsider, it feels like it is a little bit at odds with the idea of the Lions.
He's been on 2 previous tours, obviously in 13 and 17. I say obviously. In 13 with Australia and 17 against New Zealand. So he knows what he can and cannot do in that period of time. And if there's anyone that will know what he can squeeze into training-wise, it's going to be him with the experience of what he's done previously. And again, he's smart enough to know. But as you say, like the Ireland are they have brilliant players, but they're almost more than some of their parts. The way they play, the way they attack, the way they defend, the sort of how everything interlinks with the game, the set piece they have. You're not looking at, they have got brilliant individual players who can win them games, but it's, as you say, you talk about it, it's almost the Irish system that wins games, not so much the individual talent. So, and to be able to create that before Lions, the first game, you normally have 2 weeks, and half that is spent travelling to the side of the globe and doing dinners and stuff. So it's how do you then combine that into a test winning side?
Well, the first game is Argentina, right? They play.
Of course, yeah.
You know, in Dublin. So the first game is almost going to be a very sort of Barbars-esque, where you're thrown in together. people will be coming off the back of finals, coming into camp. Some people have a 2-week lead into it, but it'll be very much thrown together and go out there and play. And, just then stamp your mark in terms of that Irish style of, high possession-based team, very much system in terms of a lot of moving parts to it, and almost the team, like the performance of the team outweighs the performance of the individuals almost. Everyone's a key clog, but it's you can't perform to his level without that, because it's the way they're set up. That's going to be quite difficult, that first game. And then you're suddenly away on tour. Then their games come thick and fast. So to layer on the attack, as you say, Coley, you almost have to come away from that a little bit more. And then do you almost just try and be difficult to beat whilst having the gold dust of attack?
And when Andy Farrell first took over Ireland in 2020, he essentially took what Joe Schmitt had been doing and loosened the shackles a little bit, so Ireland not being allowed to play within the 15s and so on, all of that went. They were a bit, freer to play, but it was broadly the same game plan, and he slowly implemented what he wanted to do over about 18 months, before they kind of became the team he very much wanted them to be, because he still had a good team there. There's no point in ripping it up and, starting again. He doesn't have that option. He's got to build this completely from scratch. He's got to come up with something and get these players in, unless, of course, he just picks an almost entirely Irish team. And you kind of have a team with 10 Irish players in it, and then a few other, choice individuals dotted in. That becomes the other side of the question, is does he just end up taking, right down to Leinster squad players and just filling them out there?
Yeah.
And then, sort of George Ford in amongst a bunch of other Irish people.
Well, you also think, I'm intrigued, because obviously Mike Catt has now gone to the Waratahs. Yeah. Does he become the informant for Australian rugby, with the Irish way of playing, having been in it and done the attack and all that? Does he become, and that sort of knowing Andy Farrell and that, that's quite an interesting one as well. Just that's a side note, but it's again a quite interesting one, because I almost thought when you start looking at who he might bring on as coaches on board, Catty would have been probably one that I assumed. I know he's stepping out from Irish rugby, but no one knew where he was going. That you kind of think, he might be an assistant. Right?
Yeah.
But obviously he's now gone to the Waratahs, so he rules out. So that's the other question, is who does he bring on to actually the assistants? And I'm curious to know whether someone like Jack Nebar comes from obviously Leinster, and his experience playing Australian Rugby Championship. Does he come? Is he freer to go rather than a national coach that maybe doesn't want to give up that window as they build towards World Cups?
It'd be such an interesting appointment, both from a Lions point of view and from a wider rugby point of view, because there is, I think Razzie said that he kind of expects nine of us to be back with him by the World Cup in 2027. So we'll see if that happens, if he then gets a further level of intel on top of what he's already got with basically the full Irish team in Leinster. But he has been, over the last kind of 5 or 6 years, almost undoubtedly the best defence coach in the world. So if you can get him in, and it doesn't clash too much, and he's able to come in and run the systems, and he's familiar with the players, he's the perfect appointment. But the other side, I suppose, is Andy Farrell being a former defence coach himself. They very much, I think, kept with how he wanted them to defend, rather than bringing in someone else to run their sort of system. So I wonder if he does something similar where, Simon Easterby moved over from being forwards coach to being defence coach, and just kind of being in charge of the things that Farrell himself used to do. And he's now taking over as head coach for Ireland, so he's out of the running. He's gone. But yeah, it's an interesting one. The defence coach is probably the most wide open. It could be almost anyone.
Agree, and so that's the interesting thing. So we've talked about Leinster and how Ireland, Ireland defend differently to sort of South Africa, and even Leinster sort of came in almost like a blitz heavy, but then later in the year almost reverted back to this kind of the Irish way of defending, which is a bit less aggressive, I'd say. Still men in the line and tackling and stuff, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see. And also because Farrell being a defensive coach is how he would obviously in his mind have how he wants his team to look defensively, offensively, all that kind of stuff. So where that level of, and does he take not a risk, but does he go actually just get the best coaches, or does he get the best coaches for how he wants to play?
I think the two names that feel not set in stone but close are Paul O'Connell and then John Fogarty as well as scrum coach. I think probably got a very good chance of being carried over, some continuity with Ireland. But then it's something Gatlin talked about in, I think, 2017, that he said that the big thing that counted against a lot of Scottish players was the fact the Scottish coach didn't go with them. And he then aimed for 2021 to have a coach from each of the 4 individual nations, so they've got someone to fight their corner in the room when it comes to selection. And I wonder if that's a similar thing he'll look to do. He'll look to bring someone from all four nations that knows the players individually, and that also helps kind of managing them as well, I'd imagine. I imagine there's all sorts of sides to that. And I wonder if that becomes a part of it, is do you want to split that up rather than necessarily just going for the entirely Irish system?
It's intriguing. Are you like, I wonder if you're not forced or supposed, steered towards picking coaches from all the home unions, or can you literally go out and get the best coach that you think is going to be complement the tour? Is it about having upholding the lines in terms of all that stuff, or is it just about winning, and therefore I want that coach to come and do this for me, and I want that coach, and there's no one in the room other than himself, who obviously knows the Irish lads. I almost wonder if that's even allowed,
I'm sure there'll be some form of behind closed doors. I'm sure he will have his own choices, but I'm pretty sure in an ideal world, the Lions would be 10 players from each country and a member of staff for everything.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
You know what I mean? And so there will be somewhere along the lines, you would think there would be a sort of, not a demand, because also it's tough. Sometimes you're not going to be able to get coaches out of contracts, or some coaches will say, I can't go in. So you're naturally then limited to who you can pick. So you obviously want the best people for the job, but I guess there'll be a balance to be had of who we can have, and even off-field staff, like you think about video analysts and physios and medics and stuff, is that it's getting a blend of them, but also it's right getting the best. You might have the best individual physio from each country, but if they can't work together as a unit, then you might as well just have the best unit of, you know what I mean, all those kind of stuff that we don't obviously think about, but you will think about if you're in charge of the tour and everything else that goes with it.
So are we agreeing that we think attack-wise they're going to use sort of almost individual talent and not spend as much time on it, or they go very Ireland heavy because they know the system that he likes to play?
That becomes a conversation, isn't it?
It is. That's almost the key bit, because defensively, you can get after defence quite quickly and easily. It's not. It's sort of right. This is our philosophy. This is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it. But attack's the one where it just takes the most time.
And it just felt that Irish system felt like it took 18 months or so for people to learn, and the size of their playbook, the amount they're having to know inside out, feels enormous. And obviously, again, I think I say this every time, but you both know much better than me. Notts Corsairs Colts under 16 didn't have much of a playbook when I was playing. Didn't need that much to take on Ilkeston 16s. But I do think that adds an element of kind of difficulty to it. Because, you've got the choice of essentially, do you look at 10 Irish players, or are you aiming for a much broader team? We had Gregor Townsend went last time, who I think broadly did a pretty good job of trying to build an attack around, that more individualistic attack that can come together quicker, as well as giving kind of a Scottish representation. Gregor's one as well that actually also has a massive playbook as well himself. And again, it's like, where do you, because each coach wants their own department, right? It's so limited. So, if you're very map and structured orientated, then that takes up a chunk of the training. Right, so then you can't get all the other bits in as well. So then that dynamic of that. But you've also got to think about, like, they're playing Australia, who in my opinion right now don't really know what they're trying to be. So therefore, what bit can you spend on most on that's going to go and do the job?
That's the thing. I think it's, if you go to South Africa, you kind of you almost pick your most physical side and don't play rugby. And this is, tradition previous 4 years ago, say, not now, and similar with New Zealand is we know we're going to have to we know what they're going to throw at us. We'll pick a side to do that. Whereas Australia, you're probably going there, you're going there as favourites. So the sort of how you play, you're not sort of setting yourself up to stop the opposition. You're setting yourself up to win or beat the opposition, you know what I mean? Which is a slightly different way of thinking about things. So, how he goes about it. And the other thing about, say, the attack is, I guess in some regards, you could go down the route of not installing the Irish system, but if you have enough Irish players, they will probably naturally bring their ability to run shape off of 9, off of 10, you know what I mean? Within the system, so they can actually, without telling them to do it, if you just happen to do this, guys, that's not a problem, you know what I mean? If you three find yourselves together in a pod and want to call this move, then go ahead and do it, you know? And so, but without actually having to install it and sort of make other people learn it, you can then sort of let people play, but at the same time, let the individual talents of those players that know the system do it.
But do you think there's an issue or a potential issue of Farrell thinking, well, do I want to give opposition players a huge chunk of my playbook 2 years before World Cup, before Six Nations, etc.?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that makes me think about it. Like, if you're a line-out coach, like, how much do you give away in terms of how you see line-outs and all that? If you're a scrum coach, there are, and you are way more informed to know this, but I'm assuming there's some dark arts in it, or not. There's certain things or setups, right? How much do you actually give away knowing, first we're going to meet these guys again, following Six Nations, if I give away too much intel, and certainly could meet them in the World Cup.
Part of me thinks, because I remember 2017, Steve Borthwick was the line-out or the forwards coach for the Lions, and I don't think there was any holding back. He wanted to win, so he wanted to throw himself in it entirely and said, we want to win this, and he probably adapted some of the line-out to the personnel that were on tour. But he had Cruz and Mara and stuff like that, so they knew the system, so we could call certain things, and you have a different calling structure. But there was other line-out forwards there as well that you have to adapt. But a good coach, I think, they're not probably holding back, but they'll take their experiences into the environment and go, like, if we're going to win, I'll give everything we need to win. I might have to adapt it slightly. Like, we're not going to run England's line-out but we'll run a version of it. But I can't run England's line-out because it's going to take you too long to learn it. You know what I mean? And that's what I say. These coaches stuff becomes embedded in the system that you almost don't need to coach it because players have been in it 2-3 years, so they know it automatically. Whereas when you might have to dumb it down or adjust it for the people that you've got. So I wouldn't say there's any. I think if you're going on a Lions tour and going, I'm going to hold stuff back because I'm worried about this, that, and the other, you're probably not giving it your all. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's what I say. I don't think Farrell, it was interviewing the job. They like, he probably wouldn't have crossed his mind. It's just like, we're going to go there and win, and we're going to throw everything at it we can, and that's why we're wanting the job, because I want to win, not, you know what I mean?
Coley, talking of line-outs, little stat for you from Opta, our friends at Opta, Lions in 2013, 92% winning rate at line-outs.
Which was higher than the home unions, wasn't it?
It is higher than home unions, correct.
Which, again, was that the Lions, or was that, I know Jeff Parlin called the line-out, but I say look at the stats there, which is an interesting caveat, but like Wales, England, Ireland, Scotland all won between 82 and 84% their own ball, whereas Lions won 92%, but then other defences, when we play against each other in the Six Nations, is it more competitive line-up time where the Australians might not have valued that set piece, you know what I mean? So that's my initial thought.
That is, but also you have with the Lions got the best of the best.
Correct.
So actually,
yeah.
It should go up.
Well, but that's almost like, I remember listening to something about the American football, and they were talking about like a bit boring, but defensively, and but they were talking about like the less skillful players you have, the more complex you have to make your defensive system. So, whereas you just got good players, you can make it simple because your best player is going to beat their, you know what I mean? Like defensively, It's like your pass rusher is going to get home against, because he's so good, he's going to beat their offensive tackle, and you don't need to make it complex. You don't need to manufacture a blitz and make him hide somewhere because you're just going to beat them up. And that's sometimes with the Lions is there. That line out is when you've got the best players from each country, it doesn't have to be complex. You don't have to do multiple movements. You literally just go a bit like South Africa have done with Matfield and stuff. It's like, just throw him up really high in the air and he will win the ball. You know what I mean? That's, I think, sometimes with the Lions as well. So you have that good a player attacking defensively wise. It's like, you don't have to make the game complex. You just have to get them on the same page and go out and play your game. And that your game will get us 90% of the way there.
Simplify it because they're all good players. They pick it up so quickly.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing it does scream of, though, is Andy Farrell leading it this time. But I can't help but think he's going to literally do the next 3 tours. Like, you know, like almost
this
like Gatlin did.
Run.
This is just like, this is his first tour about like leading it for like the next 3 tours or something.
Yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? It feels like this is the building block, and then you've got New Zealand to come after this. And maybe that's the real test, you know. But hey, you know, Australia may turn around in a year. We'll see. Yeah,
we'll see. Looking at the home unions coaches, maybe Gregor Townsend might have something to say about that. But you know, Farrell's got that history with the Lions, say being defensive coordinator previous to Ireland are flying high, like a bit like Gatlin when he was in charge. He was in charge for 3, wasn't he? And basically had a 4th where he was the sort of pretty much the head coach. But obviously the Lions seem to like that continuation of that theme running through their coaches. So yeah, you can definitely see it, can't you?
The other battle as well, of course, is Joe Schmitt.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, this is, you know, I sort of mentioned Mike Catt, but you got Joe Schmitt, who, of course, employed Andy Farrell as a defence coach under Ireland, then he took over from Joe as the Ireland coach. So they'll know each other very well. So it's almost like a battle within the battle between the coaches of almost who can outsmart or outthink and kind of do that, which again, that bit I'm really intrigued at.
Yeah. And if you look at the stats between Ireland and Australia at the minute this year, obviously Ireland's kind of efficiency stats and physicality stats and so on are much higher. But in terms of tactical and decision making, in terms of where they're passing, in terms of how they're exiting, when they're choosing to pass, kick, how they're setting up, they're really similar. They're kind of normally like 1% or 2 either way, if not the same percentage, which kind of gives you an indication that they are looking at similar ideas, even if it doesn't necessarily feel that way, because one team's doing it incredibly successfully and one team perhaps less so, unless they're playing Wales. And that becomes the interesting point is, are we going to be looking at 2 teams playing the same way? And will that lead to Australia having more success, perhaps, if they're playing a team that's playing a very similar style to them?
I think there's a lot to be said for that. It's just how quickly can they do it. And
yeah.
Of course, the Lions have the games that lead into that first test. Australia, I'm not sure if they've got a warm-up game or not. You'd think they would.
You imagine one will have to be organised.
I don't think there's anything being announced yet, but you'd think Australia surely need a warm-up test before playing the Lions.
Yeah.
Because once you get momentum going in the Lions and you get those systems in place, everything's geared around performing ready for that first. Everything you do is around winning the series. The club games, you play all that, but really it's about the series. It's the only thing that matters is the series. And everything builds towards that. Where Australia, you can be in camp for a long time without a game, and then boom, you get sucker punch first test.
With the changes to the Super Rugby format they've announced, where there'll be fewer teams making the playoffs, but then the playoffs are longer and they're mad and they don't make any sense whatsoever. But it does mean there might be players that are going potentially 2 months without a game, then going into a Lions tour, And even if you're then playing one game against Georgia, that could be, or whoever, just to pick a team out the hat, that then potentially becomes an issue of you being, left a bit cold. And do then Australia release their players back to play for their club teams against the Lions in those warm-up games, as they did, a couple of times in 2017, a few of the All Blacks were released. I don't know, that becomes a whole other issue for them in terms of squad management. Do they value the time together versus the game time for the players?
It's a fascinating debate, isn't it? Because you think, if it was me, I'd want game time. I'd want continuity. I want to be match sharp, battle hardened, making tactical decisions under pressure. If I'm in camp for 2 months leading up to the first test, the time I get there, yeah, you're mad for it, but you're completely undercooked in terms of those decisions under pressure and that level.
And the thing as well, you're probably not say a good enough side, but say like South Africa and the Lions tour and stuff, like you can start slowly for half a game and build into it because you've got the quality to see you through. Whereas if you're in Australia that are potentially not not used to each other, not fully flowing yet, you don't want to end up losing the first test and put yourself on the back foot, or lose the first half or anything like that. Because how do you dig yourself out? You want to be coming out of the block, starting fast, building a score, and building confidence in your game that way. So, as you say, how do you manage that? Do you release your players back to play for things, actually get them to test? Here's you playing against the Lions. You didn't play for 2 months. Like, go play against the Lions for your club side. Go feel the intensity of those games, then come back to camp, and then we're better for it in some regards, which you can see happening. And also you can see them not doing that and saying, well, actually, we're going to have our squad together for this amount of time. We're going to train every day. We're going to play internal games in that regard, and we're going to unleash something on the first test.
I mean, 2013, if I remember correctly, Australia, Robbie Deans had them in camp, and they weren't released back to the clubs, which I think is wrong. I think the Lions deserves the you go back and the club is full of all those guys, and then they join. But South Africa also did it as well. None of them played for the club team, did they? And Razzie had them in camp, but that was obviously different circumstances. I think they were shielding or whatever they were.
But they need that game because South Africa played Georgia, didn't they? And they were fairly average in that game.
Well, they were.
But they need it. But they need that game to get it out of their system in some regards, because so then you hit the Lions and you're still maybe a bit rusty, but you've had a game under your belt. Whereas like if that is your first game, say if you're Australian, your first game is against the Lions, you've had 7 or 8 games or whatever it is, 6 games together already so far. You don't want those sort of rustiness to come out in that game. You need a game or two before to get out your system so you're flying when you hit the game. So
I think that 21 tour also throws up another point around how they'll play, in that it was that test series in particular so I don't like to use the word negative to describe rugby, but it was very kick heavy and forward oriented, and that was debated to death in the punditry, social media, newspapers, etc. And I do feel, if I remember the Lions kind of the board making these decisions, you're probably pushing Andy Farrell to play a more expansive and attacking game. That's probably why you've gone for him, even if he wasn't, even if Scotland had had a better run last year or something. You're probably still going for him because his team plays attacking rugby and it plays exciting rugby. And he probably will want to be more, to use that word, like positive, and wanting to play more expansive and more kind of free-flowing rugby rather than being very kick-heavy.
Totally agree, because it wasn't easy on the eye in 21 for anyone. It really wasn't. Where this one, you suspect that you want it to be moved. And Australia, like, you can play like that against them. You can be more expansive and play and move and do all that.
There's probably a broader aspect as well. It's like that Lions tour, not say damaged the Lions, but you had no fans. It was a bit stodgy, and you've now got a chance 4 years later to go. It's almost like not a new start, but let's sort of rebuild the Lions and make it as exciting as possible. And you can play rugby against Australia, and almost if you get into not a basketball game, but you get into a high scoring game with Australia, it's almost better than a 3-0 victory. Where Australia are and where the Lions are. So, and also from that you get some exciting highlight scores, and you build that around the excitement around the Lions again, which is always going to be there. But I say the problem is at the minute, so you go to Australia and it's a bit like, oh, well, they're going to win. So, there's not the sort of, there's always a buzz against the Lions, but I say when you play in South Africa or you're playing against New Zealand, there's an extra element, and there has been with Australia because Australia have been really good. But at the minute, it's kind of, the buzz is more in regards to, the Lions are just going to turn up and win. And so if you actually can get Lions scoring tries, and if you have a bit of a free-flowing match, then it's perfect for the brand as the Lions, if you see what I mean.
Right, I want you to give me who you think is going to be going on tour as the attack coach.
Oh.
And then we're far out here, so
yeah.
Like whatever people comment or whatever, we are proper going for it here. We've got no intel. We've got like...
Someone will dig this up in a year.
Yeah, they will. Yeah, they will.
I can't believe Phil Gatlin would go as attack coach. Townsend again, I think. Maybe kind of guts says, gives him that kind of Scottish representation, and is a very good attack coach in his own right.
Like that. I'm going to go... So Felix Jones, and I don't know the situation if he can go or not go, and I don't know. So this could show how far off we are, right? But he obviously was an attack coach under with South Africa, and I don't think he can install the defence that he wants to play quick enough. But I think that he may be the attack coach that goes.
Yeah, no, I'd probably go with Townsend in Scotland. Obviously done it previously, and Scotland are, I think their summer tour is obviously, they're not touring. I don't think they're going to be touring one of the big three down under. So therefore, he has the ability to go there and Scotland.
And the Lions probably know there's an existing relationship there. They know how they can, work around that contract. Yeah. It might be built in already. So it's probably easier to get than going to a club, pulling someone out who's doing an outstanding job. Sam Vesti or someone who's doing a great job at the club level.
Here's an interesting one. Stuart Lancaster.
Oh.
Obviously coached at Leinster, knows the Irish team very well. Knows Andy Farrell, of course.
Are Racing going to let him jump over?
Great question. I do not know.
Is that, yeah.
But that's how far off.
Depends.
We can just throw these names out there. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah. The thing is, the French season doesn't finich until I think next December.
I was going to say, they'll still be playing through the Lions.
They're still playing the 2022 season. They haven't cut up from the last Lions tour.
You're right. Scrap that. But that was the other one I was thinking of, maybe.
It's a really good shout. If he was available, I think he'd be a perfect appointment.
Just on that, do you reckon he will pick French-based English/British players?
If they're the best players for the job.
I would, if I was him.
I would, in my opinion, I'd take him, If we're referring to Owen here, he goes on tour, 100%.
I'd take, Owen Farrell, Courtney Laws, both of them. Jack Willis be in contention.
That's another one. He'd definitely be in contention. Right, defence coach. I'm going to go for Jack Nineveh.
Going out there, are you?
I am, yeah. I've just got this feeling that a lot of the home nations coaches I'm not going to be. I think Steve Borthwick's ruled himself out, right? Greg obviously did the last one. Will he want to do another one potentially? I'm not sure. Welsh coaches, I don't see defence coach Forsyth going. Forsyth,
yeah.
I don't see him going, and I don't see Kingy going either. So I'm thinking outside.
Yeah.
I'm thinking outside it.
Well, you look at the two.
And I'm just throwing them out there.
But
Well, you got
And I'm prepared to wear it.
Scotland, haven't you?
Pardon?
Tandy did the last
Yeah.
time
Tandy did the last one, yeah.
in Scotland, and then you got Felix Jones of England, which would be an out there selection. But so one of those two.
So you reckon Tandy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good shout.
and I can see Steve Tandy massively. But I would say Felix Jones, if contract and everything else pending, I think would be a great appointment. You know, obviously has history of Ireland as well, which is a great way of saying he is Irish. But yeah, would kind of fit in, has hands in multiple camps and has been around the block. Yeah, and providing that contract and everything works out, and he isn't secretly off somewhere else. Yeah, Felix Jones.
Nice, Squidge. You're going for Felix for defence. I'm going for Felix.
Yeah,
for attack.
we're fitting him in somewhere. Yeah.
Forwards
coach next.
Forwards coach. Yeah, forwards coach. That's one thing Felix can't do. It's got to be Paul O'Connell, in my opinion.
Yeah, probably agree with you.
Yeah, I think Paul O'Connell feels the obvious choice.
I say, especially with his Lions history as a player and the work he's doing with Ireland and stuff, yeah, O'Connell would be the person you'd be the favourite, surely.
And then the only other one else I was thinking in terms of scrum coaching, I don't know too many, but of course Graham Rowntree, Munster, knows the Irish system, amazing Lions legend. Does he come, given his touring experience as well, as the scrum coach?
Or, to throw a name out there, Adam Jones, or Duncan Jones as well, both doing fantastic work kind of at club level. Probably easier to get them, on side. And again, works with, a range of people, Adam Jones being a kind of legend at this point, I think it's fair to call him, from that Lions tour. So yeah, he'd be perhaps who I'd think about, who I'd look at.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about those, but yeah, Bom would be he'd be a nice link with the Lions playing and that previous tour in 2013.
Before Squidge obviously said Adam Jones, aka Bom, who would you have gone?
Well, it depends how we're selecting the criteria of the coaches.
We have no bearing. We're just chucking names out there, Dan.
There's actually someone at the Lions HQ just taking notes, scribbling on a notebook.
But yeah, I don't know. Obviously, Adam Jones would sit because obviously he's coaching the club level. You look at the international coaches and whether you want to balance out the, too Irish heavy, but then as a scrum coach, the thing with the scrum coach is, right, I'll big him up here, is yes, coaching the scrum, but also they probably have more of an influence in regards to the squad and the coaches' connection. A lot of good scrum coaches, because they just coach the scrum, but they can sit down and have a coffee with the backs and just be like, how's things? And it's almost like that sort of ability of being a conduit to the coaching staff as well, because, if the backs coach, if one of your players is chatting to the attack coach or the defence coach, you're probably you're worried that something's going to be used against you in selection, whereas the scrum coach only deals with half the squad. So therefore, you know what I mean? And I don't know enough about the scrum coaches, but Bom I know as a person, and obviously I know Tom Harrison from England, but they have a good way of around the squad and that kind of stuff. But you're probably looking at your scrum coach, not so much, yes, you want the technical side of things, but you also want him as someone that's good in the group environment.
Now, there's no Lions tour without the legend that is Neil Jenkins, of course, running on the tee, being unbelievable. But the one chap as well that I would say that potentially can do that role, he was such a phenomenal bloke and would be amazing at the guys, like the guys that aren't playing, like the non-23 skills, the kicking, mentoring, all that, would be Kevin Sinfield. Like, he's someone that is a winner, gets it. He could be another one that potentially Andy Farrell might have his eye on going, I want him to be part of this touring team.
Easily just bring him in as miscellaneous coach,
yeah.
Just because he can cover a number of areas and just have him in the environment.
Just have him in the room, 100%. Yeah. And Jenks, of course.
Yeah,
and then they could reminisce about, Wigan, Leeds, the kind of like
true,
Rugby League playing for England and Great Britain and that kind of stuff. And yeah, they could do all that,
Picking
couldn't
up
they?
sand.
Yeah.
I think we've pretty much just picked our coaching staff to go.
God, it wasn't hard, was it? It's fine.
And it's not as if we put ourselves out there, is it?
Yeah, a lot of safe choices. But yeah, no, but that was the massive thing. Is like, on a different, I'd be like, how it'd be interesting to see the coaches that Farrell picks, because I think they'll have a reflection on how he wants to defend it. Or say, if you have Felix Jones as a defence coach, it's probably like you want to play an attacking defence. Whereas if you have sort of Tandy, who's a bit more Scotland are ferocious in the contact, with a bit more bodies in the line and filling the field. So it should, for those coaches, you'd hope we give you hints at how the Lions would play.
Coley, you've nailed it. We've tried to predict how the Lions might play, but once the coaching staff's announced, I think we'll be a lot more informed to how they want to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. And also once the squad comes out, it was the thing in the last tour that you perhaps, you looked at, there were some names when you looked at them being announced in that, video live, you kind of were surprised by it. Then you looked at them on a sheet of paper as a full squad and you went, oh, there's clearly an identity in how they want to play, like every back five forward being a line-out jumper and, all kinds of like three very similar scrum halves and so on. And that sort of thing, suddenly when you see the squad, sometimes you can go, oh, I know instantly how this team's going to play, And I suppose these gaps are going to be slowly filled in over the next year, because at the minute, we know nothing.
We know nothing. But the great thing is we get to sit here and talk about it all the way until it does. And we'll be debating it until the first test team's announced as well.
Do you think, like last time's Lions toured Australia, it was 1-1 going into the final test, wasn't it? Do you reckon there's a chance that Andy Farrell picks the entire Welsh team for that final game?
I think the chance he drops O'Driscoll. The chance O'Driscoll doesn't play that third test.
Just literally picks everyone.
Yeah.
Apart from Ian Evans.
Yeah.
Was the only Welsh guy that didn't get picked in the final test.
Bless him.
Which I think he then, as he stared at his pint of lager, realised
Yeah.
his test career could be slowly but gone. Having been the only one left out. Oh, love it.
Yeah.
Squidge, thank you very much for joining us again, mate.
Thank you for having me. No, it's always a joy.
You're welcome anytime.